your coat and get your hat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear that bit of fat? Oh, that happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with those blues on parade, but now I'm not afraid. This rover crossed over. If I never have a cent, I'll be rich as Rockefeller. Gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street.
Hi, my name is Lynn Ellsworth.
And I'm Suki Cheong. Welcome to the Human Scale City. This is a weekly show where we'll take you on a tour of New York City's wonderful neighborhoods and ask ourselves, and you, how can we save them from destruction and keep them affordable for those who already live there?
As you probably know from your own neighborhood, our city government is letting the real estate industry run amok. We're going to meet with community activists, politicians, and urban experts to help us figure out what we can do to fight back. We'll show you video and photographs of the neighborhoods we're talking about.
We're going to learn how the rules of the game favor real estate interests and how those rules can be changed to favor a human-scaled city.
So today we're going to talk about campaign finance reform, and we have two guests, Sal Albanese and Brent Ferguson. Sal Albanese is running for mayor. He was city councilman. When were you city councilman, Sal?
82 to 97.
82 to 97. He's now an attorney. And our second guest is Brent Ferguson.
Brent Ferguson is a counsel in the Brennan Center's democracy program, where he works in the money and politics team. He graduated from Columbia University Law School, where he was a Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar.
So we want to talk about New York's campaign finance law. Is it as good as it's made out to be, or is it not?
I don't think so. I think it fails in its core mission, which is to prevent deep-pocketed, conflicted interests from dominating our campaigns, and also doesn't do much to help grassroots campaigns on a citywide level. So it's in my opinion, it's a myth that we have the best system in the country. I think there are better systems like Seattle, Maine, and Vermont, and I think we need to overhaul our system. It just fails in its core mission.
Why is it considered such a model? Brent, what do you think about that?
I do think it's a sound system, and I don't think it's perfect. I think Sal's right, but what I think it does is it encourages candidates to raise money from a broader group of donors and rely more on small donors than candidates in almost any other city or state in the country. And while some candidates, especially for mayor, still rely on large contributions more than we'd prefer, it does require, especially city council candidates, to raise small donations from a diverse set of people. And when you compare the system to New York State candidates, candidates from the city are really raising smaller contributions and from a more diverse group of people.
Right, and that's because the state's campaign finance system is different from the city's. In the city, if I give $175 to a candidate, the city gives a 6-to-1 match, I think?
Yes.
All right.
Only once you reach a threshold.
Wait a minute, what's the threshold?
Well, you have to, in order to get the 6-to-1 match, you have to raise, when you're running for mayor, you need 1,000 donors, which is fine, I agree with that. Then you have to reach 1,000 city residents have to contribute to your campaign, which is reasonable to show you've got grassroots support. But then the second step is $250,000 in matching money, which is very hard to do. You're talking about thousands of donors. So it's a two-step process, and the second step is totally unfair.
Wait a minute, so to run for mayor, you have to raise $250,000?
No. To get matching money, you have to raise $250,000 in matching money.
Okay.
In matching money before you get the 6-to-1 match. So therein lies the problem. I mean, 1,000 donors should be fine because that demonstrates you have support, and the city can then match your donors. But no, it's a two-tier test, and the second test is $250,000. It used to be $170. They raised it to $250, making it very, very difficult for grassroots candidates to compete.
Why do you think they raised it? Why is it so high, Brent?
I'm not sure why it's so high now. I do think that, as Sal will agree, we need some type of threshold for number of donors to show that candidates are serious when they want to run for office. But I do agree that if we make sure that candidates are getting donations, especially mayoral candidates from a broad set of the city from different geographic areas, as long as they're getting a lot of those donations, then they don't necessarily need to raise high dollar amounts. And I think it would open the system to more serious candidates that care about people from all across the city by just having a number requirement through different geographic areas of the city.
Tell us quickly so people can get an idea, out of the current people who are running for mayor, how many of them qualify for public money at this point?
Just the people, Bill de Blasio probably will definitely qualify, and so will Paul Massey, who's a multi-millionaire. Those are the two that I see that are definitely going to reach that threshold because they rely on very, very big donors, people that can contribute $4,950. And what happens is once you build up that momentum, and people, the newspapers say, well, Paul Massey has X amount of money, Bill de Blasio has that amount of money. They're both at a very high level. More people start to contribute. It builds a momentum, and it hurts grassroots candidates.
Right.
The threshold is the maximum contribution of $4,950 is ridiculous.
And that's out of a field of how many candidates, Lynn?
It's like four or five candidates for mayor, but I'm looking at this is the contribution limits for each office. And I noticed that for mayor, the contribution limit is $4,950. For city council, it's $2,750. For someone like me, this is a high limit. I can't imagine contributing that money to anybody, no matter how much I support them. For me, $250 is kind of fairly generous. I'm kind of excited. This is a good candidate. Can I afford $250? Why is that so high? Like, what's the logic behind that?
I think
I have my theory, but I'll let Brent go.
Sure. I think that the people that passed the law were likely concerned about participation in the program, and we've seen several public financing systems across the country that get very low participation because not enough candidates feel like they can win under the system. A way of compromising a little bit is to have somewhat higher contribution limits, and New York cities are fairly high. I do think now, as you mentioned, some people think that's a weakness in the system because especially candidates for mayor are allowed to get matching funds, but then also rely on people that can give almost $5,000. And so other programs like Seattle's, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, I think, have lower contribution limits. There's some danger that they might get less participation than New York City's system, but we'll have to see.
Well, that brings us to the Seattle's democracy vouchers, which is a new innovation in campaign finance that the city of Seattle voted in after a ballot initiative, which I find very interesting because we don't have ballot initiatives here in New York. Like, we can't get a petition going and get something on the ballot, which is another problem.
You do have that ability. It's a high threshold. That's how term limits were passed. You can put it on the ballot. That's one of the beauties about New York City and how we can develop a real model of a political system because there are certain things we don't depend on the state for. One of them is the ability to put a charter revision commission together and put these things on the ballot. Lobbying reform, democracy vouchers, all of those things are possible in New York City. We did it with term limits back in 1988.
But wasn't that a big millionaire who financed that campaign and put people on the streets to get the signature? And that is a huge kind of effort that on a grassroots basis it's hard to do. It's hard to mobilize. You have to pay those firms that you hire to send people out to get the signatures. And we don't have that right on the state level either. You can't do a state ballot initiative, which I find disturbing. Right. Let's now look at a short video from Seattle that explains democracy vouchers.
There's been an ever-growing concern with just how money flows in politics and the different influences that are at play, and I think people just generally feel like the system's broken. A study came out from the same institute, Sal Albanese Institute, that the way that money flows in Seattle is that candidates typically spend most of their time dialing for dollars and not talking to voters. That really, in order to win, you have to raise a lot of money and you have to spend a lot of time talking to people who will give you money. The democracy voucher idea was something that had never been tried before. The concept of the democracy vouchers is twofold. It's really about putting the power back in the hands of people. So I'm a voter. I get 4 $25 vouchers in the beginning of the year. That now makes me a donor. I'm not just a voter, but I'm now a donor. So I have 4 vouchers that I can give to any candidate of my choosing. I can give them all, or I can give one. And so that will also incentivize candidates to come talk to me at the door, because if they can come and talk to me about the issues I care about and make a compelling case for why I should support them, I can give them these vouchers that I didn't have before. It will allow candidates who who don't have like a strong donor base to become more viable to run a competitive race. I think that's the other thing we see is that in cities where you don't have any kind of public campaign financing, you have a lot of similar people who are tied to money or have a lot of donors in their networks getting elected to office. You don't see a lot of community representation. And we made a commitment early on that we wanted to really elevate communities of color, young people, women, folks who don't feel like they have access to the system. We had a short timeline on this. I mean, really, at the end of the day, we had 5 weeks to get it on the ballot, and we had to raise money to do that. We were fortunate enough to have additional funding come in to help support field efforts for organizations to go out and talk to their community members in culturally appropriate languages, to have community forums. We went into Election Day hopeful, thinking if we're going to win by a small margin. And the results came out, and we came out with a strong 63%, I think, in the first reading, and we just freaked out. It was amazing. I started crying, other people started crying. We were just like, I can't believe, A, that we won, and B, that we won by such a strong margin.
So this is a real democracy voucher. Well, I printed it out for but every voter in Seattle, even if they've moved away apparently, gets 4 of these. And they give them to the candidate of their choice. So let's talk about what is interesting about why this might be interesting in New York and why it might be problematic. So let's start with the interesting part, Sal.
Well, I'm totally on board with this plan. I'm excited about it. It's really about democracy. It allows average people to have the same amount of clout as they should have as people who are multimillionaires. It's also equitably distributed throughout the population. As the video pointed out, most of the big donations come from rich white neighborhoods. This would allow people in poor communities to participate. It forces candidates to engage them. I mean, I'm not talking theoretically, I'm talking practically. I've done this.
Well, let me ask,
can tell you,
so if I have 4 of these on my fridge and I live in Inwood, how do you get them out of me? Like, how do you get what do you do?
I knock on your door and I say, I'm Sal Albanese. I'm running for mayor or city council. Okay. I would love your voucher. Or I call you on the phone, or I go to a town hall meeting. I go to a festival in Inwood, and I run into you and I'd say, look, if you like my politics, go to my website. I would love your voucher. It forces candidates to engage with regular folks instead of wealthy donors. I mean, under our campaign finance system in New York City, people running for citywide office spend an inordinate amount of time talking to wealthy folks who are self-interested. That's how they raise their money. It's an outrage. And the system that we have, in my opinion, is totally ineffective. It doesn't promote democracy. It doesn't promote giving people an equal voice. This is significantly better. If this system was in place today, people will be writing stories about Sal Albanese's campaign for mayor, because I have as much money as anyone else.
Right. You just write in the candidate's name, sign your name, and I guess it gets magically made into cash from the city to the candidate. Now, why might this be problematic? Right? Why might there be trouble behind this, or disadvantages?
Sure. Well, first let me say I agree with Sal. I think it's very exciting, and we strongly support this program, and I hope that it works out really well. And if it does, then I think it would be interesting to implement some type of system like that in New York. We just don't know how it's going to work yet, and there's a few questions. I mentioned earlier Seattle will have much lower contribution limits than New York City.
Right.
Will candidates participate in the program, and will they get enough money from the vouchers? We don't know that yet. Will enough people use their vouchers? Will people understand what it means and give them to the candidates of their choice? We think there's a fairly high chance that they will, but we're really excited to see how it works this upcoming fall and in the following election. Right. And maybe take some lessons from that and see how it can be implemented elsewhere.
Well, congratulations to the people of Seattle for taking the first step. I think this is an amazing thing to just jump in and do it. And I'm kind of sympathetic to the idea of try it.
Yeah, and
especially
let
if
me
nothing
say
else is working.
It's a major plank of my platform for mayor. It's one of my top reform initiatives.
One of the things that I find interesting about this is that the same law that put this into place also put in a couple of other rules in Seattle. One of them was that if you're doing business with the city, you can't give money at all, not even zero amount. Or if you have hired a lobbyist, you can't give money at all. And so I find that a real startling contrast to New York City's situation. We also have a law that says that you can't give more than, let's say, if you're running for mayor and you're not running for mayor, if you want to give money to a candidate for mayor, you can give $400 if you're doing business with the city. So this is a printout of the major donors to de Blasio's current re-election campaign. I printed out the first 3 pages. The top donor gave $9,900. That was Aaron Lebowitz from Metro Electric Principal. I also noticed that every highlighted name here is from Big Real Estate, or from Big Real Estate's legal counsel, or Big Real Estate's spouse, or Big Real Estate's lobbyist. We have Rudin Management and Family giving forth the maximum contribution. It's a total of like $25,000. Now I noticed that Rudin owns many properties in Midtown, which is being under consideration for rezoning. So how is that legal under our law? Brent? You guess, like, what's the loophole there that allows that to happen? Or maybe there is no loophole. I don't know.
I can't really speak specifically to the donors at issue here because I haven't fully seen this list, but I do think that it's important when you have these doing business contribution limits to clearly define what counts as doing business. And I do think it's challenging to make sure that it's a bright line and that everyone understands who qualifies and who doesn't. And then once you pass that bright line, to make sure that it's enforced fairly, certainly.
So for those of you who don't know what bright line means, it means like a very clear, solid rule that everybody just gets. It's simple. Well, here's the campaign finance law, the printout of the 2 pages that explains what does it mean doing business with the city. And I've highlighted this page, or this section right here, and I'll just point out that the Department of Housing Preservation and Development has discretion to decide who is doing business with the city. They shall consider the significance of the affordable housing program and the degree of discretion of city officials in determining which actions, transactions, and agreements shall or shall not constitute business dealings. That must be a huge loophole for the real estate industry to just say, well, I'm doing affordable housing, so that doesn't really count as doing business. Is that what that means, Suki? What do you think that means? You're a lawyer.
I think it's pretty clear that the law says that anybody who has a ULURP action before the city is doing business with the city, but then there's this loophole, right?
Well, wait, if you're ULURP, well, wait, Midtown rezoning is a ULURP process, so that's clear.
You can drive a truck through the loopholes in this system. Let me tell you something. We have, not only have we, in my opinion, developed an ineffective campaign finance system, there's an entire cottage industry now, lawyers, compliance folks, in order to deal with this stuff. Even people running for the city council have a hard time negotiating this stuff. It's a huge bureaucracy, huge conflicts of interest are built in. It's a well-meaning. It was well-meaning when it was first passed years ago after the Koch scandals. There was you guys may be too young to remember, but there was a huge city scandal, and Koch started this program. And it was weak then. I voted for it in the council, saying it's better than nothing, but it is totally ineffective in terms of the issues that you just raised.
Well, this feels ineffective to me. I also point out that there's lobbyists. In another printout, we see that there's a staffer from a vice president of Capilino, one of the most important lobbyists in the city, has given small donations, which fall within the Doing Business Act. But $100 to pretty much everybody, adding up to a considerable sum, and that's just one staffer from Capilino. And in Seattle's system, you can't even do that. Like, that's just ruled out.
It is unbelievable to me that we have a campaign finance system in this city that allows lobbyists to bundle money. They shouldn't be contributing to begin with. Capolino, the guy you just raised, he's bundled $50,000 for de Blasio that we know of. You know, it's
now,
it's a mess.
I understand that Ben Kallos has proposed a tweak to the campaign finance law recently. Maybe, Suki, you want to explain that, and let's find out what that might mean.
Sure. So currently, there is an overall expenditure limit for each race. For mayor, I think this year it's 6.9 million. Did I get that right?
Something like that.
So each candidate can raise matching public funds, which is part of what helps to amplify small contributions.
I don't quite understand why there need to be different rules for the mayor's race as opposed to the city council.
Well, they're going to be spending a lot more money, so they have higher contribution limits, which is pretty common, you know, in any state or city throughout the country.
Yeah, but it's because it still doesn't sound right to me. Just
They should have higher contribution limits.
Well, maybe they should have just more people giving them money rather than the limits be higher, and you know, because you know the stakes are so high, and the mayor is such an executive power that. You know, like almost doesn't matter what the city council does. The mayor can just roll right over them anyway.
Major players in the city, what I call the permanent government, made sure that this thing here is designed the way it is. It basically maintains the status quo. I mean, this was not designed by accident. These limits that go through the roof, and the $4,950. People sat around a table who are consultants, lobbyists, permanent members of the political system, permanent members of the political class in New York City.
I'm sort of curious as to who was behind it, because I know, you know, there's a procedure where all the policy wonks get behind a thing, and they push, and then somebody gets in and then starts getting into the microscopic details.
They will fight. They will fight democracy vouchers. They will fight democracy vouchers tooth and nail.
Right.
Tooth and nail. New York City, the tabloids will go off on it. The real estate community will go off on it. They will battle this proposal that like you've never seen before.
Right.
This is really about democracy. This system they can live with because it's
I agree with you. They'll probably get very upset with it.
They will go nuts. The newspapers will say it's expensive. You know, it's outrageous what they're trying to do. Because this will really bring democracy to New York City. I mean, there's no perfect system.
In Seattle, they had to build a huge coalition, it looks like, they failed on their first round. They didn't get enough votes on the first ballot initiative, and then they got like everybody. They got the lead women voters
what's sad
in.
Is that they passed this in South Dakota too, and it just got repealed.
That's unbelievable. That is
really sad.
By the way, when I go into crowds to talk about democracy vouchers, I'll go into very liberal crowds, and very conservative crowds, and when I explain the democracy vouchers, people vigorously nod. They get it.
Yeah.
They get that the system is corrupt, and this thing, if it got on the ballot, it would pass by 60-70% because they know that the system is broken.
Well,
and de Blasio's
getting a ballot initiative. Now, this is another
That's a rough one.
conversation. You have to have big money, and it's set up to be overturned, and the city council can veto it. There's some tweak in the law that even if you get it going, that the city council can then redo it themselves.
There are major obstacles. If the people in the preservation movement got together, this thing could happen. I mean, but if they elect me mayor, it's definitely going to happen. Believe me. They'll fight tooth and nail.
The neighborhood groups are fierce and mad.
The Murray Hill folks are really furious about what's happening to their neighborhood.
Yes, they are, as they should be.
And then you've got the other side of it, right, which is, I remember reading once, this might have been during the Bloomberg era, that like 25% of New Yorkers are employed in real estate and finance, right? So it's a significant industry.
Yeah.
And then you've got all the people who own valuable property,
Right.
Right? So like some part of people is really mad about corruption, but the other part of people knows that they benefit from the system.
You still have a real estate industry in the city. I mean, I also think that in the long run, if we destroy the character of the city, real estate values are going to, drop. I mean, if you have a city, in Denver now, the mayor started a program called Move Denver because the city has become so totally overdeveloped and congested that businesses saying we're going to move out of the city. And by the way, the congestion in this town and with all the construction that's going on, that's going to hurt real estate values. Or we may just have money being parked from abroad. You'll have just an empty city
The whole thing
with
is just
luxury condos. You need a balance. You need a balance.
Have you read the law? What do you guys think about this?
Well, I'll say I think the law is a good idea. Essentially what it does, as Suki said, is instead of providing candidates with just over half of their spending amount in public money, it allows them to basically spend almost only public money, and they can raise only small donations and then their matchable amount, and that's their entire universe of spending. Whereas right now, they're incentivized to raise more larger private contributions. For mayor, that might be close to $5,000, and for city council candidates, it's a little bit lower. We definitely support this law, and I'll be testifying in favor of it next week. I think the promise that it has is to allow candidates to rely mostly on small contributions, which candidates for mayor aren't necessarily doing right now. I don't think by itself this bill will likely fundamentally change the system because it doesn't lower the contribution limits, and candidates are still able to raise those big contributions. So the ones that can do that might continue to do it. I do think that this bill, in combination with perhaps slightly lowering the limits or requiring candidates to raise money from different parts of the city, like I mentioned before, that could have a real effect.
I don't think it materially changes anything because, as Brent said, the bottom line is candidates will get on the phone to get those $4,950 contributions because that brings their fundraising skyrockets. They're not going to go around the city trying to generate $50 contributions, $100 contributions, and you still need to reach. You still need that threshold of $250,000 matching money to get matching money at all. So I think it's a small tweak with no real significant impact on what we have. This system will stay in place. People who do business with the city can still bundle money. Lobbyists can still bundle money. It's
and we've got the doing business mess going on here.
It's much ado about nothing.
I will say we do need to look separately at the mayoral system versus the council system because it's true with council candidates, providing them with the full public financing can really change their ability to raise more money from small contributors.
Thank you guys for coming. This is the beginning of a longer conversation.
Stand up and fight until you hear the bell. Stand toe to toe, trade blow for blow. Keep punching till you make your punches tell. Show that crowd what you know. Until you hear that bell, that final bell. Stand up and fight like hell.
When you fight out in the open air, in a patch of light,